Hey guys, for this unit, we're going to be talking about independent clauses and some of the sentence errors that go along with them, as well as punctuating them properly. Remember I said before that if you're a little foggy on the difference between a phrase and a clause, that's one of the really helpful things to know when you're talking about punctuation. So if you're a little bit fuzzy, you don't remember, you want a refresher, be sure to pop back and take a look at that video before starting this one. This time around, we're going to talk about run-on sentences, which is going to bring us to our first comma rule, and then we're going to talk about two things that tend to trip students up, which are compound predicates and comma splices. So let's get started. Probably one of the most common errors next to sentence fragments that I see from students are run-on sentences. And if I were to ask students what a run-on sentence is, they say, oh, it's a sentence that goes on and it's really long. That's not actually true. A run-on sentence, sentences can actually be quite long. There are some sentences that are 5 or more pages long, and they're completely perfectly punctuated, so it's not a problem. A run-on sentence is 2 or more independent clauses that are improperly punctuated, so they run on into each other. A run-on sentence doesn't have to be long. It can be something as short as this. Okay? We have our first clause right here. Brad is the subject. He's the one who is emailing the teachers. Emails in this case, is the verb. This is the action he takes. This is who gets the emails. Over here we have he doesn't want. Want is our verb, our action. He is our subject. He doesn't want to annoy them with phone calls. Okay, so we have an independent clause right here, and we have an independent clause right here. So this is the definition of a run-on sentence. What we need to do to fix this is to punctuate it properly, because remember that a clause is basically a complete idea in and of itself. So if we don't separate it properly, the reader can't really take a breath. They just get idea and idea and idea, but idea or idea, so idea, and they can't keep up. They have trouble understanding which ideas go with which ones. The easiest way to fix a run-on sentence is to insert what's called grammatically a coordinating conjunction, which is a fancy term for something you may know from high school as a fanboy. Okay, the coordinating conjunctions are these 7 folks right here: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. If we look again at our sentence, we'll note that we actually already have one of these fellows hiding in here, this but. Okay, the fastest way to figure out whether you have a run-on is to look for one of these guys and then look to the left to see if you have an independent clause. Look to the right. Do you have an independent clause? If so, place a comma right there, and this fixes the run-on sentence. Not too bad. Okay. Not all run-ons are that easy to fix, but this is probably one of the more common run-on errors. So for now, check your sentences to see if you have coordinating conjunctions and go ahead and fix them. However, this also tends to trip students up because we say, oh, well, if I have a coordinating conjunction, I'm just going to put a comma before all of them, and that's going to fix the problem. That doesn't actually fix the problem, because sometimes the sentence looks like this. Okay, Brad emails his teachers but doesn't want to annoy them with phone calls. Now, we learned this is a coordinating conjunction, right? So we're going to put a comma right here. Remember that when you place a comma with a conjunction, it effectively does the same thing as a period, right? If we do this, this turns into 2 separate sentences, and it sounds okay, maybe a little choppy, but okay, right? However, if we do that here, this is what we end up with. Okay? Remember, a clause has to contain a subject and a verb. It has to have a subject acting on a verb. We just lost our subject. The way we've constructed this, we don't have one. Okay? So, instead of inserting a comma with that conjunction, we're going to leave it alone. This is what's called a compound predicate. Compound predicate. This, again, is a super fancy grammatical term that you don't necessarily have to remember, but what you do need to remember is that if you have a subject acting on a verb over here, and you have a subject acting on a verb over here, you have two independent clauses, and you need a comma here. If you have a subject acting on a verb over here, and you don't over here, you don't add a comma. And this sentence is grammatically correct because you have one subject performing two or more actions. Okay? All right. The last thing that we're going to talk about today is a comma splice. Some of you guys might see this a lot from your instructors. Sometimes we just feel like two sentences go together really well. They feel like they're really closely related. We don't feel like we should separate them. In this case here, we're explaining why Brad emails his teachers, so we don't want these two things to get lost. The problem is that a comma alone is not strong enough to separate the two independent clauses. If you've ever watched the original Star Wars, there's a scene where they fall into a garbage compactor, right? And the two walls are kind of going like this, and they're trying to get out before they do this. Okay. In this case, your independent clauses are the walls, and this guy is Luke and Leia. So he's going to get crushed by these two independent clauses if we don't do something, okay? So if you have a comma splice error, if your instructor tells you you have a comma splice, you have three options. Option number one is simple. You can put a period there. Option number two is you can add a fanboy. Make sure that you're using an appropriate fanboy. So for, in this case, kind of means because. He emails his teachers because he doesn't want to annoy them. This would work. You could also use but. In this case, either one of those would work. You can also use a punctuation mark called a semicolon. However, use this very sparingly, and only if you understand that if you can't use a period somewhere, you can't use a semicolon. If you can use the period, only use a semicolon if the two sentences are closely related to each other. If that sounds really complicated, skip the semicolon and only use a period or a comma with a conjunction.